Welcome, everybody. It's Armor of Truth Live, number 426. Now, for decades, Americans have been told that globalism is inevitable. Right? It's the New World Order. You can't stop it. Nobody in the White House is going to stop it. You can't trust them. That's easy to believe, right? And I'm with you. But we've been told, we've been led to believe, and it's become status quo now, that national borders, cultural distinctions, sovereign decision-making, all this had to be sacrificed for the sake of global stability. We were promised peace through integration, prosperity through interdependence, and moral progress through transnational governance. But what we received instead was endless war, neoconservatives. We're talking about now all the way back. Well, not all the way, but far enough. Take it all the way back to H.W. Bush, right on up through Clinton for 8 years, W. Bush for 8 years, Obama for 8 years. Republican or Democrat, they were on the same plan. They shared the same goal. Endless wars, hollowed out nations, unaccountable elites, and an economic system rigged, of course, in favor of those who write the rules but never live under them. Today, I want to show you something. We're going to be looking at what could be the most serious challenge to the globalist framework that we've seen in many decades. We're seeing the emergence of a radically different vision. It was embedded in the latest national security strategy that we shared with you in the last show, but there's more to the story. There's a leaked document, a leaked plan. To make it short, what we received in the 33 or 39-page document that was the national security strategy for November 2025. Again, that's a national security strategy is a plan that every president will release during his first year in office. The administration releases it, usually the National Security Council. His cabinet will produce this, and it will express the commander-in-chief's vision of the world and how he believes we should interact with the world. So I shared with you the details of that in the last show, but since then, something else has been leaked. Now, the White House is denying that there's any more to it than what was already released, but this seems more like something that was leaked on purpose. You know, it's out there. It's not the official policy position if they let it out this way. But it does send a message, and that's probably what it's for. It's particularly to send a message to Europe, you know, home of the New World Order, the Geneva-based Babylonites. There is something in this new leaked document, and we'll see in time whether or not this is legitimate. But something was released, and what it says is in harmony with the national security strategy, but it goes into more detail. It goes a little further. For example, there is a Core 5 alliance right here. It represents a clear break from the post-Cold War consensus, what's known today as the post-World War II consensus, the liberal international order. It rejects the fantasy of a permanent American hegemony, the idea that the United States must endlessly police the world, subsidize foreign decline, keep all the nations up. and enforce ideological conformity through institutions like NATO and the EU and the G7. Instead, it returns to a more grounded principle. America has interests, not obligations, to manage the internal failures of every other nation on earth. So at the heart of this shift is a sober recognition that culture matters. Religion matters. Now, that was in the national security strategy too, but it's even expressed more here. It openly speaks of strong families, spiritual health, civilizational continuity, not as private sentiments, but as a national goal, our foundation. But Europe's crisis is key. Also, the statement or the suggestion that Europe may not be our ally for a lot longer if it continues to willingly self-destruct. If they continue to squash free speech, if they continue to allow migration, illegal migration, to allow this flow of migrants in, purposely. It's being done on purpose, which is watering down the home nations. Europe is losing its identity, and the EU seems to be doing this on purpose. Now, Europe's crisis is not merely economic or military. It is civilizational, and that's what the strategy said. It said that Europe is facing a civilizational erasure if they don't stop what they're doing. Now, what this new document is talking about is, rather than propping up decaying supranational bureaucracies, the strategy signals a willingness to work with other sovereign nations and movements that still value nationhood and borders and free speech and cultural inheritance, which very specifically includes religion. And in the American sense, that would be Christianity. And then there's this new idea that wasn't mentioned in the official release, the Core 5 Alliance, a proposed realignment of global power that bypasses the moral theater of global clubs and instead acknowledges reality. For example, the United States, China, Russia, India, and Japan. Now, that sounds odd, doesn't it? That sounds strange on the surface. Well, let's think about it for a bit. The U.S., China, Russia, India, and Japan, all civilizational states with real power, real populations. Each one has over 100 million, and real interests that they want to protect. This is not about utopia. It's not about consensus. Managed competition is the goal. Clear lines will be drawn, and about national responsibility within your region of the world. So this matters even more when viewed alongside the recent whistleblower testimony from inside the global financial system itself. A former World Economic Forum insider has laid bare how ESG, or environmental social governance, coming out of the WEF particularly, was never about ethics or sustainability. Look, we knew that all along. That's nothing new to you. But now we have people, bankers, who are involved in it, coming out. The time has passed, and now people are coming out of there and exposing what really was going on there. And it was about, of course, shocker, control. Control through weaponized finance used to coerce governments, corporations, and populations into compliance with an unelected ideological agenda. Globalism has been failing for a while, and it's not by accident. It was operating exactly as designed. So today, we're going to ask this question plainly. Is this Core 5 vision a genuine break from globalism? Could it end globalism as it has been marketed to us over the past many years? Or is it just a reshuffling of power? Is this just another move into regionalism? These are good questions. Check out our Substack. If you go to armoroftruth.net, you can get to our Substack, and Summer has some articles there, recent ones for you that talk about that specifically. Regionalism is the thing we have to be careful that we don't fall into. That would be just another form of globalism. It would be the next stage, right? It's like if globalism is, okay, so we have the status quo. We have what is now. We have some nations and we're sort of split apart. But if globalism is the goal, so this is the thesis, what we have now, and globalism is the antithesis. That's actually where they want to be. But they can't jump straight to it, so we have to have a synthesis. And the synthesis would be regionalism. So as we think about this new Core 5 alliance that's bubbling up out of the Trump administration or coming out of the White House recently, there's a lot in there to feel good about, a lot to be positive about. In fact, I'm going to prove to you later on that the particular worldview that's expressed within that national security strategy and in this leaked document too really do align with biblical doctrines of government, of protecting your own, protecting and providing for your own, providing for the defense and the safety, security of your own first. Just as it applies to the man of the house, it applies to the leader of the nation. Is this a beginning of a return to sovereignty, order, and realism? Or is this just simply globalism adapting to survive? That would be regionalism. So it seems like regionalism is very possible. We talked about it here quite a bit. Again, on Substack, Summer has articles there for you that you want to check out that explain regionalism for you very well, so you know what to look for where we don't want to end up, because you can guarantee these globalists are feeling the heat, and you'll see in a minute from the way they're reacting. So they're going to work hard for some kind of compromise here that keeps their goal alive. So let's walk through the strategy, the leak, the power players, and what this could mean for the future of the world and for America. And yes, in just a moment, I'm going to show you, after we walk through this Core 5 alliance, I'm going to show you this WEF whistleblower who has exposed ESG for the marketing scam it always was. James Roguski. We've done quite a few shows with James Roguski, and he had one of the best takes on what the Sustainable Development Goals, what the World Health Organization, particularly during the scam, damn it, what they're actually doing, like the pandemic treaty, for example. He had identified that as really just like a venture capital scheme. It was a marketing plan, for the elites to filter more wealth to themselves and get a hold of the governance of other nations. And the way you do this, this is what you'll find out later with the WEF, the World Economic Forum insider. After the 2008 financial crisis, when, many banks failed, because what they had done is through speculative and predatory lending practices, they had created such a financial bubble. Real estate, for example, was one area where the bubble occurred. And through this speculative financing, giving people mortgages and loans that were really too good to be true, it pumped it up so high that it couldn't be sustained anymore. And of course, it crashed. And in 2008, what happened was all of these global banks that were on the cusp of failure went to the government and sat before committees and testified, saying, look, our institutions are too big to fail. If we fail, this is going to destroy the dollar. This is going to destroy the nation. You need to help us. No. We didn't need to do that. Those were lies. It would have been difficult for a while, but those were lies. Nevertheless, the Obama administration did do that. They did help out all of the wealthy elites by bailing out the banks and several corporations that were in trouble because of the financial crash of 2008. And so the people were upset, rightfully so. Trust in the institutions was lost. And so in response, they needed a new moral narrative, a new banking narrative. And that's where ESG comes in. The new responsible financing, responsible banking. And that's what Klaus Schwab meant by stakeholder capitalism, right? It's investing. It's with a purpose, with a moral purpose. All right, so let's dive in and look at a little bit of this. All right, let me show you first before we get into this. Make sure you check out Substack. Just go to armoroftruth.net, and that'll take you right over to our Substack. The most recent article here from a few days ago is how BRICS, the crown networks and technocracy, are replacing American power, how they're working hard for that. And this particular article will mention some of the points that I just mentioned to you that Summer had written about. And as you scroll through these articles on Substack, you're going to find a variety of topics that are going to enrich you and edify you. And particularly with our topic today, you're going to find lots of information about regionalism, globalism, and how they're really the same thing. Ideas like this. Now let's look over here for now. Okay, let's get into it. So here's the, let's go right here. The Core 5 Alliance. Over the summer, President Trump made headlines when he lamented the expulsion of Russia from the Group of Eight, the G8, now the G7. And it was, of course, the European Union that wanted to kick Russia out. Trump said that was a very big mistake. He even suggested that he'd like to see China added to form a G9. That sounds odd, doesn't it? Why would we want to do that? But think about it for a minute. Think about it for a minute. Europe has always wanted China to be the enemy of the West because it benefits them when there are powerful nations or nations that are ideologically opposed, severely ideologically opposed, that sit on the world stage as antithesis to one another. So if there could be an alliance where you have Russia and China in this mixed with the United States, and there are some other European nations that are mentioned in this too that the document says they'd like to do more with, it would seem that would go a long way to make war and nuclear war and world war, in fact, a bit less likely. Trump's national security strategy proposes taking this a step further, creating a new body of major powers, one that isn't hemmed in by the G7's requirements. So that particularly means that no more Europe doesn't get to run the show anymore. It's a new alliance. The strategy proposes a core 5 or C5 made up of the United States, China, Russia, India, and Japan, which are several of the countries with more than 100 million people. It would meet regularly, as the G7 does, for summits with specific themes. So this would be, a group that would be advocating for their own interests. And since Europe is not down with this, it would most likely be advocating against their interests. That's a very interesting development. Europe, of course, has the nations of Europe. And the European Union has been a United States ally all along. So first on the C5's proposed agenda would be Middle East security, specifically normalizing relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. This is interesting too because Israel is not, it doesn't seem they're really interested in this. For example, the relations that Trump has with Qatar right now. Very stable, very good relations. They're one of our strongest allies in the Middle East. Probably, you know, it might be going a little far to say they're a stronger ally than Israel, but recently Israel bombed Qatar. And that irked Trump pretty badly because when they did it, they tried to make it seem like it was something that Trump wanted, but all along, Trump has been working very hard to create a strong relationship with Qatar. You might have heard recently that there were going to be Qatari Air Force bases in the United States. Well, that wasn't exactly true. There wouldn't be any bases here, but they were going to be working with them. In fact, Trump has guaranteed the safety, the national security or the safety of Qatar. That's a recent development. So anyway, moving on to this. So the document suggests or, points out the truth that this American hegemony wasn't achievable. It means, as we defined it for you a moment ago, the American hegemony, the idea that we're going to be involved in every nation on the planet. When they fail financially, we'll be there to pick them up. When they need military support for whatever they want to do, we're always going to be there because we're going to be the global hegemony. Trump says, no, that's not reasonable. That's just a way to milk the United States of its assets and ultimately of its power. The full national security strategy also spends some time discussing the failure of the American hegemony, a term that isn't mentioned in the publicly released version. Hegemony, again, is the wrong thing to want, and it wasn't achievable according to the document. In this context, hegemony refers to the leadership by one country of the world using soft power to encourage other countries to consent to being led. After the end of the Cold War, American foreign policy elites convinced themselves that permanent American domination of the entire world was in the best interests of our country. But the national security that's what the national security strategy states and continues, yet the affairs of other countries are our concern only if their activities directly threaten our interests. So that's a new look. That is not what the neocons believe in. Remember, George Bush was the one responsible for the global war on terror, spreading democracy throughout the world. That is how you kind of define the post-World War II consensus, spreading democracy all over the world with bombs and bullets, right? A liberal international order. When George H.W. Bush, stood at the United Nations saying that from here on, the people of the United States will pledge allegiance to the United Nations. This is why I said it. This was their goal, to create an American global hegemony. Not because they want America to be great. The goal was always globalism. So the administration appears to be using this reasoning to bow out of the United States' role in defending Europe while turning its attention to Venezuela-based drug cartels, or more specifically, just keeping an eye on what's going on in our region, keeping the violence and the drug trafficking and the immigration or the migration and all that. Just keeping an eye on all this, keeping our area of the world peaceful. The Trump administration inherited a world in which the guns of war have shattered the peace and stability of many countries on many continents. Now, this was the original national security strategy. It says it shouldn't be up to the United States to do it all alone, but also China and Russia should not be allowed, this is a good one, to replace U.S. leadership. The strategy suggests partnering with regional champions to help maintain stability. So what they're really saying here is that we want to try to create some economic partnerships so that we have a shared stake in survival to the detriment of Europe if they're going to continue down their path. We will reward and encourage the region's governments, political parties, and movements broadly aligned with our principles and strategy, which is not Europe any longer, according to the document. But we must not overlook governments with different outlooks. That would be, so this would be talking about, China and Russia, with whom we nonetheless share interests, some interests, and those who want to work with us. Now, after this was published, the White House denied that it was, that it had anything to do with the original document. But of course, that's not unusual when a leak comes out to deny that the leak actually existed. So there's that piece. That's an interesting look at things. Now, just to give you a little bit of background here, when they're talking about an American hegemony, it's this liberal international order, the post-World War II consensus. It is an ideological hegemony. And one of the main flaws of that was this idea of spreading democracy, right? In Iraq, in Afghanistan, we're spreading democracy. That is a flawed concept. You want to spread the idea. You think that you can take a constitution like we have here and just implement it in Afghanistan, and all of a sudden the people will be free. It's not possible. Remember that for probably the 1500th time this year, we're making the case. We're telling you what the founders believed, that this nation was founded, and this type of government, this constitutional republic, could only be maintained and kept by a virtuous people, and by virtuous they mean a Christian people. It required a certain kind of person, a certain kind of a nation of a certain kind of people who were personally responsible and grounded in the moral law of God, because that's, as the founders knew, the only way to thwart tyranny is through the moral law of God. So you can't just take a constitution and we're spreading democracy. That's not how it's never going to work that way. You would have to Christianize the nations. They would have to be believers. They would have to have a Christian consensus like our nation has had for so long. So this American global hegemony, there's some problems with this. After World War II, this liberal international order was the assumption. This is when we saw the creation of the United Nations for the purpose of being the global government. And the United States would be the military arm of that. Of course, the crown would be provide the capital, the money. The Vatican would give the moral legitimacy. But after World War II, the idea of this, no one really defined what it meant. They just called it this liberal international order, and the idea, again, of spreading democracy around the world. But they never defined it that clearly, and that's probably by design, to keep it open-ended. In ideological terms, the liberal international order is the post-World War II consensus among the victorious nations of World War II. So let me give you an example of what's actually behind this national security statement by reading a little bit from Michael Anthony, the one who was responsible for writing it. he's saying that one of the main problems in Washington is what J.D. Vance referred to in a tweet recently as permanent Washington. What that actually is the embedded policy planners, the think tanks, people that we don't ever elect, who advise the president's the executive branch when they come into office, and help to establish the foreign policy. Those people have been embedded in there since the end of World War II, and for sure since the fall of the Soviet Union. They are a priesthood, Anthony says, and they protect their status by muddying the simple and clear, pretending that the complex is just clear and obvious, but only to themselves. The foreign policy establishment in Washington is very much a guild. It means they stick to their own. They don't change their views. And this priesthood operates and draws income from the liberal international order's constituent institutions. So it's their career, it's their livelihood. So that's how they're able to stay there and stay embedded, because they remain funded by whoever you want to say, whoever it is that has the money, right? These are these elites again. The liberal international order is embedded organizations, think tanks, unelected central planners. That's what creates the ideological hegemony that we've had for the past many decades. We'll say that particularly since fall of the Soviet Union, and really with George H.W. Bush becoming president. They have assumed truths and goals, but they're all arbitrary. Now, here's the background of the national security strategy and this new C5, this new Core 5. Let's see where to go. There it is, this Core 5 alliance. The political ideology behind it is pretty good. Now, this could just be words, but once I tell you what their underlying worldview is here, or they claim for it to be, this is what you can look for. When you see them diverge from this, then you know there's a problem. So, America's national interests, per tradition, are anti-globalist. That's what the foreign policy position of this Trump administration has officially been declared to be, anti-globalist. I know. You might not trust Trump. That's not the point. The point is, here's the strategy they've declared. Let's watch it and hold them to it. America's national interests are to pursue and promote three things: prosperity, prestige, and peace. So we need to understand what those mean: prosperity, prestige, and peace. So by prosperity, they mean to maintain and increase the American people's standard of living and the American nation's aggregate wealth. So what that really means? Make America great again? It means to build up the middle class, bring manufacturing back here so that everyone has plenty of work, because that'll make our nation strong. We protect Americans first. And then there's peace and prestige. It means maintaining our standing in the world, making alliances with friendly nations, and also maintaining fear and respect of other nations. Now, this is an important point. Respect, for sure, right? But it's okay if they fear you too, right? It would be better if some of the Middle Eastern nations feared the U.S. a little more today. And that doesn't mean we have to instill fear into them with the military, with bombs. Just being strong, having a strong middle class would prevent things like you're seeing happen in Dearborn and in Minnesota today with the Islamic invasion. In the peace and prestige elements, The idea is to avoid poverty and avoid death. In other words, provide for and protect your nation by deterring or, if necessary, winning wars. So a big point in this strategy is to deter wars, prevent them from happening. But if they do happen, we need to be able to win them. The first priority of every state is to protect its own safety and the safety of its citizens, preventing invasion, conquest, enslavement, and destruction. Since expelling the British, U.S. territory has been invaded only one time, and that was in 1814. And it's been raided once in 1916. Since then, we've suffered 2 mass casualty attacks on American territory. That's not bad for 240 years. Now, the reason for this impressive record is, one, because of where the United States is located. We have huge oceans on either side. We have a mostly friendly or non-threatening nation to the north of us. We have one to the south of us that's getting a little more testy here lately. But that's what Anthony says here. We have an enviable location that's easy to defend. And the nations that surround us on our borders are mostly peaceful, except for the drug cartels. So that is why the cartels are high on the priority list now. So it's very improbable to impossible that we would be invaded by a hostile power. It's a very difficult thing to do to the United States. Now, here's the other point about prestige. Think about contempt and prestige as being opposites. Contempt is the negative sense. That's where people outside the United States have a negative view of the United States. That wasn't always the case. After World War II, the rest of the world respected the United States. But then, as this liberal international order and this post-World War II consensus, this globalist ideology embedded itself more and more, the narrative changed. And you can see now we're not well liked around the world. We were definitely hated around the world during the global war on terror. Prestige, by contrast to contempt, is engendered by strength, wealth, and the sense of being a nation that's on the rise, or at least one that's strong and stable, rather than a declining power. First, being held in contempt when nations hate us, that increases the probability of death and poverty. So what I'm explaining to you is the presuppositions behind this particular national security strategy. This is what's informing it. So we want the rest of the world to not see us in contempt, but we want to create an air of prestige. We want to be respected around the world. And the way we go about that is through our own prosperity first, by being a strong nation. Remember, that was the narrative many years ago, decades ago, that you want to come to America so you can make your way and live the American dream. That's prestige. That's how people used to think of America. They don't think of us like that now. And that's one of the goals here, is to return to that. Prosperity accrues across the board for nations who are respected and even a little bit feared. Now, back to that point of fear. Fear is important. It's important for nations that hate you and are hostile to you. It's important that they respect you, but it's also important that they fear you a little bit. But too much fear can be a problem. That was the Bush administration. Global war on terror. So you have to have a delicate balance, between respect and fear. So this requires prudence. Now, these points matter. Prestige and contempt matter because whether or not our nation is respected around the world and whether or not our nation is declining or rising has an effect on the soul of the people in the nation. I don't mean the actual soul. I'm just talking about the mindset, the attitudes of the people who live in this nation. It has to do with the effects on the soul of patriotism and national pride. People like to be part of something greater than themselves. The soul suffers when one feels that one is part of a declining nation. A related aspect of prestige is the fate and health not of just one's nation, but of one's civilization, religion as well. The overarching cultural, linguistic, ethnic, and religious civilizational framework. And what he means here, because he is a constitutional originalist, what he means here is Christianity, because that was the religion, that was the consensus at the founding of the nation. Western, anti-American, anti-Christian civilizational framework or consensus has been declining severely since 1990. We've shown you graphics here before from 1990 to today or to recently. In 1990, 72% of the people in the United States said they were members of a church. By 2020, by actually 2019, that had dropped to 42%. Now, it had been at 70 or 72% since the 1930s when they started recording that statistic. And then just in a matter of 20 years, it dropped from 72% to 42%. Why? Why? Why did that happen? Demoralization. Infiltration that was probably allowed because the purpose was to weaken us, to bring us down, to make this global order more likely. Demoralization. And at this point, we may be going through the destabilization phase, unless this particular strategy could somehow come to fruition. And I realize that many of you, myself included, are very skeptical that this could come to pass. But I'm going to leave you today with a message of hope, because it doesn't do us any good to be cynics or to be overly cynical about this. If you're a Christian, you are called to have a positive attitude about things like this. To say that it's not possible is to say that God couldn't do it, wouldn't help, wouldn't bless his people, wouldn't bless the Christians in this nation if we were faithful. That's doubt. Remember what James says about doubting. You know, if you lack wisdom, ask God, who gives freely without judgment. Doesn't judge you for what you don't know, but ask in faith without doubting. That means believe. That means believe him. Don't hold a contradictory view about God while you're asking for his blessings. Okay, let's look at this right quick, and I want to give you my biblical case. This was on the Winston Marshall show recently. This lady here, I have her name here somewhere. Desiree Fixler. She was a banker, a former investment banker, former internal architect of the very thing we're talking about, the environmental social governance investing. So she was right in the center of the storm. She was a participant in the institutional world surrounding the World Economic Forum. She dealt directly with Klaus Schwab, for example. What she exposes here is that the entire environmental social governance, the Great Reset agenda, again, this is not a surprise to you, but we're just getting confirmation of what we already suspected. She says that it was never a legitimate economic reform, but it was a multi-trillion-dollar marketing enterprise driven by elites, sustained by misinformation, operationalized through regulatory capture. So this we knew. Like, we knew that this is what they were doing, but this is the confirmation from inside. Why is that important? Because confirmation from the inside is the first sign that the thing is cracking. It's breaking. Now, as she says in this interview, she really believed in responsible investing, especially after 2008, when the attitudes about banking around the world were had been harmed, right? It was they had an image crisis. But while she was there, she discovered evidence of systemic deception and, as we've been saying here all along, ideological manipulation from within these global bankers, and particularly the World Economic Forum and the Davos crowd and the Geneva-based Babylonites. Right? So I already explained to you why people were attitudes about the bankers became so negative. It was after the 2008 financial crisis. So the global banking elites needed a new... Let me let you hear the beginning of this, just so you can hear the intro.
You are an outspoken whistleblower. You've called out the Davos elite.
Our old systems are not fit for the 21st century. We need a great reset.
How did you get to a point where you helped build the WEF's Great Reset?
In 2020, I get my dream job. So I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer at Deutsche Bank. When I was there, that's when I see the fraud. Everything is a marketing scam. The bottom line is this. We cannot issue this annual report. This is a legal living document. It is filled with lies. And a couple of weeks later, I was fired. And the next day, the annual report came out with all the lies. They don't just fire me. They go on this horrific smear campaign. Within 2 days, the U.S. authorities call me up. The SEC, the FBI, and the Department of Justice. And they ask me...
You're going further and saying they're controlling the world.
The WEF is huge. Its tentacles affect every part of your life. This isn't stakeholder capitalism. This is socialism. They're lying to the public. They've manufactured a climate crisis. It's a multi-trillion-dollar industrial complex. The Davos agenda is much more than just net zero. The Davos agenda is about...
Desiree, I should ask, did you ever meet Klaus Schwab?
Yes.
Anything to say about it?
Truthfully,
So there you go. There's a teaser for you. You should check out Winston's interview with her to get more details. But I'm going to summarize it for you right here. I have watched it. I took notes. And a lot of this are not going to be things that will surprise you. Once again, it's just confirmation of what we've been saying all along, what I'm sure you all could see was happening all along. And again, of course, let's just all step back for a minute. Could this be an operation? Of course it could be. Could she be the real deal? She could be. Could she be an agent? She could be. But let's just look at what she has said and measure it against what we know. All right, so after the 2008 financial crisis, these bankers, these elites needed a new moral narrative, and the ESG model emerged in response to the ethical crisis of confidence that the bankers were experiencing. Remember what happened? They used all of your tax dollars to bail out these billionaires whose businesses should have just failed and they should go and start another one. But no, that's not how it worked. So this is where, again, one of the main points in here that was very helpful, the idea of stakeholder capitalism, which we've defined here for you before. It's sort of the antithesis to shareholder capitalism, the Milton Friedman model. This is where stakeholder capitalism basically says that, everyone in the community is involved in this particular economic venture, not because you're going to profit from it, but because you're going to make you feel like you have a say in it. It's a scam. Stakeholder capitalism, as articulated by Klaus Schwab, she puts out, was sold to the world as profit with a purpose. And what was that purpose? saving the world from climate disaster, social justice. ESG became the moral language that helped rehabilitate the financial sector without changing its incentives. So basically what she says is they were able to convince the world that whenever they slapped the label of ESG or DEI on their company, that was basically the license to do business. Without those, you wouldn't be allowed to do business. But it's not only businesses. It was also governments, right? It's environmental, social governance. So let me play this clip from Matt Moore's show yesterday where he played, he was covering the tragedy at Bondi Beach over the weekend where at least 10, maybe now a dozen people, including the people who did the terrorist act, were killed. Terrible thing. But listen closely. Who you're hearing speak here is actually a British member of Parliament talking about what happened at Bondi Beach. But so we're not really talking about that story. We just want you to hear how this particular lady frames it and what she makes sure to say.
In Australia.
Again, this is to show you that this member of Parliament, and perhaps the entire British Parliament and all of the UK and most of Europe, are still in sync with the WEF and with this whole scam. Listen to what she says. This is the tip-off.
This is a member of the United Kingdom Parliament who chimed in on what we all just saw. I think you guys are going to want to listen to this.
We don't want to speculate.
Can I crank up the audio here? Okay.
We don't want to speculate on what the factors are that have contributed to this awful tragedy that seems to be of a huge scale. You know, the fact that we know that 10 people have lost their lives today is utterly horrendous. And, you know, my heart breaks for those people and their families and for the communities affected across the world. I think it's important to note that the escalation of this narrative of who we're against and how much we want to divide each other and how much we want to attack each other, that is really at the core of a lot of the problems that we have in the country at the moment. And I firmly believe that people are good and that given the opportunity, they will look out for each other. And I just want to say that as much as possible, we should try and detoxify the way that we think of people who aren't like us.
Yeah, there you go. Detoxify people. Detoxify the way we think about people who don't look like us. But that's not it. There's more. Here comes the money shot.
Are you feeling stronger? Are we feeling strong these days? Have things gotten better? Has the diversity really made? I'm a little bit sick of the diversity, to be honest.
And I firmly am on the side of...
Right. So what he's saying there is another point to make clear. Whenever they say diversity is our strength, that is so that they can signal to the WEF that they are down with the plan. We're with you. Please don't shut us down. And whether they believe it or not, they know that that's what they have to say in order to be able to have their government. To have because they're all dependent upon the global bankers. All right, listen to this.
Of working together and celebrating our difference, because, you know, I was a community organizer a long, long time ago, and
that means she is a communist. That's what community organizers are. That's a dog whistle for that. That's Barack Obama was a community organizer.
Strongest campaigns that we ever worked on were about bringing people of different faiths and different worldviews and different backgrounds together to find what we had in common. And at times like this, it makes me think of, you know, what happened with Jo Cox and her speech and that mantra that she had about more in common. We have more in common than that divides us. And that is the most true statement.
Tell that to the 11 dead people.
That's a good point. Yeah, so, you know, what you're hearing there is ESG language. Just as an example, and I know that you guys who are watching this are not. This is not new information for you. But look, we're We're continuing to build our case and to get better and more detailed at how we understand and talk about this. Because if this strategy is what it appears to be, we need to be able to identify when they go off the track, and this is how. For example, right there in the Trump administration today, we have this White House Office of Faith. Again, Summer has several articles about these topics that show you the problems that are sitting there in the Trump administration, where they could very easily shift right over into these ideas again. But the reason that this White House Faith Office coming right in after a communist regime like the Biden regime was, we're very much motivated to use Sustainable Development Goals language and the actual goals themselves in their documents, which Summer pointed out to you in the articles, how even these Christians, so-called, in the White House Faith Office, it's an ecumenical group, right? And one of the points that Summer makes in her article is that what that really does, as this lady said, we bring all these people together to celebrate all the things we have in common. What that ultimately does is it pushes out anyone who claims to have the truth, because you're not allowed to have the truth. You're supposed to honor all the truths, or all the assertions and presuppositions of truth. So obviously, the effect that has is that it pushes Christianity to the edge, pushes Christianity out of the public square, out of the argument, because you can't come in here and say that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, because there are Muslims in here too, and you can't be saying that here. Right. Prophet with a purpose, right? This is the purpose. A new moral narrative. This is the first significant point, and where I want to offer a critique here of the WEF here and the environmental social governance and the whole thing, because we're identifying it as Fabian socialism. This is the first significant point where the Fabian method emerges. It's this moral rhetoric that's used to mask the power consolidation that they're actually engaged in. And it's accomplished through gradual institutional transformation, in this case, through an ideology. Elite consensus, but never through open public debate. Ms. Fixler in this interview emphasizes repeatedly that the profitability of ESG was not rooted in enhanced performance of these companies or even improved risk-adjusted returns. Instead, the profit flowed from the fees that they could charge for being ESG or DEI or social justice or sustainable development goals compliant. And one of the main points for it was to create a reputation. We are the moral ones. The reason I'm bringing this up is because this strategy, this new national security strategy, and this leaked Core 5 document, at least in the text, stands in direct contradiction to these globalist narratives. Fixler calls this whole scam, this ESG scam, a multi-trillion-dollar industrial complex. In fact, it's very interesting that James Roguski had figured this out 3 years ago, probably 4 years ago now, that what was going on at the World Health Organization was just a financial scam. It was a scheme. Now, Fixler's experience and what she says in this interview illustrates how environmental social governance became a top-down ideological mandate immune to any dissent, right, because they claim the moral high ground. And that is another hallmark of the Fabian strategy. When dissent is not debated, but administratively neutralized. That is what they've been trying to do to Christianity. And when Biden was in office, the Disrespect for Marriage Act, they were trying every way they could to silence Christianity in the public square. And now we can show very clearly through evidence that they were definitely, I mean, we always suspected that they were in cahoots, right, with the WEF and all those guys, the United Nations, but this gives us more evidence. That's probably enough about that, because I want to get to this biblical case and get out of here. This is not going to be the regular 3-hour dirge. So go watch this interview with Desiree Fixler at the Winston Marshall YouTube channel. But as we conclude here tonight, we want to think biblically. It's important that we're clear and sober-minded. No modern policy framework, no matter how good it may sound, is derived directly from Scripture. And no statesman governs as a theologian, at least none of ours do. But Scripture does give us enduring principles for authority, responsibility, justice, and for love of our neighbor. Now, when you measure against those standards, the worldview underlying these policy positions that are in the National Security Strategy and this new Core 5 leak document, they align more closely with biblical doctrine than any foreign policy paradigm the White House has advanced in many decades. And here's why. First, Scripture establishes that authority is delegated by God and it's bounded in its scope. That's Romans 13, 1 through 4. It teaches that civil rulers are ordained by God for a specific purpose. And what are those purposes? To restrain evil and to reward good within their jurisdiction. So government is not called to redeem the world or engineer moral transformation abroad like ESG and like the WEF and the Geneva Babylonites were doing. It's also not called to manage all nations equally. So the idea of equity is, there is a biblical sense of equity, but it's not, they redefine it. So when foreign policy assumes universal managerial responsibility, then it exceeds its God-given limits and collapses into this coercive idealism. A strategy that rejects this idea of a permanent American hegemony like we've had from the neocons now. When I say neoconservatives, I mean Clinton and Obama along with the Bushes. That you might be a Democrat, but they're on the same page. They're working for the same goal. That's why you see them when they hang out. That's why you see Michelle Obama and George W. Bush so lovey-dovey. They're in the same fraternity. So this strategy that I presented to you now in 2 shows has demonstrated that it is counter to this global hegemony, this endless intervention. And because it stands against that, that's one reason that it is more closely aligned with the biblical understanding of authority as limited, accountable, and ordered. Secondly, Scripture affirms the principle of rightly ordered provision beginning at home. Paul says it plainly, if anyone does not provide for his relatives, for his own house first, especially for the members of his household, it says in 1 Timothy 5:8, then he has denied the faith. He is worse than an unbeliever. This principle applies as an analogy to nations also. A government that neglects its own people's security for other nations, a government that neglects its own people's economic stability and cultural health in order to manage the affairs of distant nations is violating moral order. It's violating the scriptural mandate for governments. And loving your neighbor doesn't mean abandoning your own household. In fact, faithful provision at home is a prerequisite for meaningful responsibility beyond the home. All right. Third, Scripture consistently links national stability to moral and religious foundations. Psalm 33:12 says, Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. So while Scripture does not mandate a theocracy, sorry, Courtney Turner, that's not what Doug Wilson is working for. Scripture doesn't mandate a theocracy, and none of these reformed people that are so regularly chastised and hated on by these podcasters, none of them are advocating for a theocracy. That's terrible analysis. But Scripture does teach that societies flourish when they honor God's moral law, particularly in the preservation of family, truth, and justice. The foreign policy laid out in this national security strategy recognizes religion, family structure, and cultural coherence as matters of national strength. And in that point too, it stands far closer to biblical realism than the secular technocratic strategies that treat human beings like interchangeable economic units. The fourth point, biblical liberty is never autonomy, right? Biblical liberty is not license. It is freedom ordered by truth. 2 Corinthians 3:17, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. That's very clear, isn't it? But that freedom exists within God's moral boundaries. Strategies that defend free speech, national sovereignty, and lawful self-government, rather than enforcing ideological conformity through these supranational institutions and these multilateral organizations. When you find a strategy that contradicts that and puts the focus back at home, that better reflects the biblical view that liberty is grounded in accountability to God, not in submission to unelected elites, particularly the ones who are embedded in Washington, D.C., the liberal international order. Fifth, Scripture affirms plurality among nations. Right? That means there will be many nations and borders. That's why there will be no new world order, as in there will be no borders and one world with no boundaries. And that won't happen, because nations are the way that God has designed this dispensation of time for the restraining of evil. Since the Tower of Babel, since the languages were confused at the Tower of Babel, nations have been the way, have been God's way. Acts 17:26 teaches that God, quote, determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place. So nations exist by divine providence. It doesn't mean that they can't fall. They can, but generally nations will be the order until the Lord returns. Nations exist by God's decree, by His providence. That means distinct cultures, traditions, and histories, and responsibilities. So this is what you look for in your government, whoever it might be. Look for attempts to dissolve these distinctions through global governance or whatever. You know, like you just heard the lady in the UK Member of Parliament saying, we come together to celebrate the things we have in common. That's a good thing to do. But what they never do is identify the things that we disagree on. They like to keep that below the surface. The problem is the things that we disagree on, like with the Islamic culture, are so severe that it makes it impossible for us to cohabitate. Again, any attempt to dissolve these distinctions, Christianity, for example, are not neutral. They are rebellion against the created order. So look for that. If you see our government, the one who's in there now, trying to do that, trying to make it so that Christianity is equal with all the other religions like the White House Office of Faith does, there's a problem. That has to be dealt with. And in fact, the White House faith office's own policy standards are in contradiction with this particular national security strategy that has been released over the past couple weeks now. A foreign policy that works with nations as nations rather than erasing them into systems, whether it's regional systems or whatever. The idea in this strategy is to work with other nations, not to dominate them, not imperialism, but to work with them more closely, aligns more closely with biblical anthropology and history. And so finally, Scripture anchors all political engagement in hope, not fear. That's the message I want to leave you with today. God is sovereign over kings, all of them. That means he's sovereign over from the civil magistrate in your own hometown, right up to the president, right up to the King of England. They're all under God's authority. And God has established them. He allows bad kings. Bad kings are used as a rod of judgment on people who have been rebellious. But the thing you need to take away today, Christ is king right now. Not just in the future someday. He is king now. Matthew 28:18. All authority in heaven and on earth is mine, said Jesus. No alliance, strategy, or policy determines the course of redemptive history. But that sovereignty, our sovereignty as Americans, with our national sovereignty, doesn't excuse us for being passive, for abdicating our responsibility and not engaging. Christians are called to faithful stewardship, to speak the truth, to seek justice, and to love your neighbor. That means you have to be involved to make sure that your neighbor is being cared for right by the government that's in your area. It's one of the reasons why we should fight boldly against abortion. That's how you love your neighbor. That's one way. Speak truth, seek justice, love your neighbor, and preserve God's good gifts where he has granted them. And American liberty is one of God's good gifts because it allows the gospel to go forth freely. So, we have good reason for hope, not because this national security strategy is aligned, more biblically aligned than anything we've seen in a long time. Not because of any person who's in office. We have good reason for hope because any leader, no leader is flawless. We have good reason for hope because God reigns now. So, as Christians, if we would be faithful stewards of the liberty God has granted us, allowed us to have here, the unalienable rights that he has allowed these founders to establish, grounded in God's moral law, engaged in the public square, if we would be engaged in the public square with courage and humility, if we would be committed to truth rather than withdrawal, then our labor will not be in vain. Christ is king. God is sovereign. And obedience, which is faithfulness, never despair. That is the Christian response to the times in which we live. So I encourage you, check out this national security strategy. Look at this Core 5 alliance and see what you think. Research and find out whatever you can find out about Michael Anton, the guy who was responsible for writing this national security strategy, and see what you can learn about his worldview. I've been reading a lot about him lately, and I'm saying to you that if it's real and if it were to come to pass, it would be a very good thing for the United States of America, and it would be good for Christians too. And that's why we should pay attention to it and support it and hold them to their promise. All right, my friends, thank you for joining us today. We will see you again here very soon. God bless you.
Tell that to the 11 people that bled out.
As early as 1928, the communists declared that the racial differences among our people constituted the weakest and most vulnerable point in our social fabric. By constantly probing and straining at this one spot, they calculated that eventually the cloth could be torn apart and that Americans could be divided, weakened, and perhaps even set against each other in open combat. The average American, they say, soft and decadent. He'll become paralyzed with fear and panic. He'll run away and hide and do nothing to interfere as they strike at the community's power centers. Any all-out revolution must create a state of crisis wherein almost all of the male population would be forced to remain in their homes because of its affluence. It has waxed soft. The motive force behind its life drive is its endless pursuit of prestige, conspicuous consumption, and sensual pleasure. After the stage is properly set, America could be brought to her knees in 90 days. Ladies and gentlemen, the organization behind these preparations has almost unlimited financial resources. Our enemies are deadly serious about their task, and it's nothing short of national suicide for us to continue to ignore their plans and their progress. The strategy calls for the quiet conversion of our government. They have one and only one solution for all problems. More government, and then more and more until it's total government. In 1943, the following directive was issued from party headquarters. It read, "When certain obstructionists become too irritating, label them after suitable build-ups as fascist. Label them as fascist or Nazi or anti-Semitic, and use the prestige of anti-fascist and tolerance organizations to discredit them. In the public mind, constantly associate those who oppose us with those names which already have a bad smell. The association will, after enough repetition, become fact in the public mind."
Because I don't hate anybody. And I want to see every single solitary person on this earth. I want to see their soul saved. Every single solitary person. And each and every one of us that calls ourselves a Christian should pray vehemently for their souls, that we would see them in heaven and forget about all this when we get up there.